Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Tonight's session is geared towards laws of Purim with a specific focus on this year, which is a strange year on two fronts. Of course, COVID makes everything strange, and the fact that it's a Friday Purim is always a little bit different. So as we've done in the past two sessions, I again want to thank Miriam Friedman for initiating this program. I think it's been very productive, Baruch Hashem. As we've done in the last two sessions, I want to thank all the people who submitted questions ahead of time. The first focus will be to go through the questions that were submitted. My hope is through the answering the questions that were submitted, many questions that many of you might have will already have been answered through my reviewing the questions that were submitted. God willing, at the latest at 8:45, we'll open the floor up for other questions through chat and the like. I'll ask for people not to call out questions as we go, just because many of the questions will be addressed, and just to sort of hopefully get through a lot. It's easier if I can just talk a certain amount, just by nodding or shaking head. Can people hear me okay right now? Is the sound okay for people? Great. Okay, thank you. I have to preface, I suppose some of you at least read the guidance that I sent out through the cyber brief. I made the point of the cyber brief, but I sometimes it's different when you see or hear it in person. I want to be very clear. All of the advice that I gave is assuming it's medically reasonable and wise for a person to be doing that. I can't emphasize that enough. So if for a person's personal medical issues, or because of a person's age, if a person's feeling upon consultation with their doctor is that they shouldn't be exposing themselves to other people inside a building, or that they shouldn't be exposing themselves to people outside, then a person should take one of the other options. I tried to give, and we'll do it tonight as well, I tried to give sort of multi-tiered guidance for different people, what works for them, but I must emphasize that none of that is intended to endanger oneself in a way that a person has been so careful not to. If a person is not sure if it makes sense to be doing this, probably you shouldn't be doing it. Now, having said that, I think it's a fair question to also pose to oneself. If I'm getting together with people outside because they're making a kiddush, or they're doing this, or they're doing that, and I find that to be okay in my life, then probably it also makes sense to be thinking about getting together in similar circumstances for an outside Megillah reading. If it's different, it's different. You have to make your own choice. But I can't emphasize enough that all of this is with the overarching intent that people not be doing what's considered to be unsafe. Okay, so let's start off in, hopefully there's somewhat of a logical sequence, but not exactly a particular order. One of the questions posed is this Shabbos' Parsha Zachor. Just to make sure we're all on the same page, there's a mitzvah from the Torah to hear a few psukim read recounting that which the nation of Amalek did to the Jewish people. And it's a mitzvah to hear it read from a Torah, not just read from a printed Chumash. Statement number one. Statement number two, it's clearly a mitzvah at the very least for men. It's disputed in general if this mitzvah is for women as well. The logical distinction between men and women in this context is the point, though there's beautiful ideas shared about Amalek and the lessons regarding Amalek, the most basic point of the mitzvah of Parsha Zachor is that when the day comes, we have to be ready to kill the nation of Amalek. That, in a sense, is a military mitzvah. And of course, for many, many times, in many junctures over the history of our people, military things were more the realm of the male as opposed to the female. So, according to many opinions, a woman's not obligated in Zachor in the first place. We normally, in normal years, try to make it our business to for women to hear Zachor as well. But statement number one, if a person is able to make arrangements, if a woman is able to make arrangements to hear Zachor in person from a Sefer Torah in a safe way for them, great, kol hakavod. If a woman is not able to make arrangements, or if a woman feels it's going to bring this whole added level of stress, it's going to be so complicated. I don't know about any of you. I'm doing just fine on the stress quota right now. I feel I'm yotze the amount of stress I have in my life. If it's going to be very difficult for a woman to do it, I'm not sure it's essential for a woman to stretch herself in if it's going to be very complicated and very stressful for her. Now, a man, if it's feasible and if it's safe, really, it would be a very appropriate thing for a man to make an effort to hear laning on Parsha Zachor. I'm sure others in the community as well, we are organizing various readings of Zachor, even outside the scope of the regular Shabbos morning davening, inside, outside, this time, that time. If you are interested, you can still, to the best of my knowledge, you can still sign up on the Shul's site. If you go to the Shul's webpage, yiac.org, there's an icon for Purim registration. You can sign up over there, though I would urge you to sign up sooner rather than later at this point. But let's say, for one reason or another, a person missed Parsha Zachor. It happens. It happened. First of all, by the way, let's say a person, heaven forbid, has COVID right now. Let's say a person has COVID symptoms. It would be wrong to go to Parsha Zachor in that circumstance. Or if it's just not feasible for a person to hear Zachor, is there any recourse? So there's a very famous Magen Avraham. The Magen Avraham is of the opinion. I'm sorry, let me take a step back for a moment. What is it about this Shabbos anyway? Why does one have to hear Zachor this Shabbos? Where does it say in the Torah that you have to hear Zachor this Shabbos? And the answer is it doesn't say it anywhere. The rabbis learn that, generally speaking, when we're given mitzvos to remember things, the context of remembering it is once a year. There are various halachos related to that. So the rabbis worked under the assumption that if there's a mitzvah to remember Amalek, it should be an annual mitzvah. Now, the rabbis could have picked any time. The rabbis could have picked, Erev Shavuos. And they could have done it any time. Because Haman descended from the nation of Amalek, it was considered to be a very appropriate time of year to perform the mitzvah of hearing the psukim about Amalek. The Shabbos before Purim, not part of Purim, but sort of adjoined to Purim. So there's some different possibilities if a person missed Zachor. One possibility is a very interesting one. It's from the Magen Avraham. The Magen Avraham says that it's not exactly, it doesn't have to be those three psukim. You need to hear when the Torah talks about what Amalek did. One way of hearing what the Torah talks about what Amalek did is the psukim of Parsha Zachor. But another way of doing it is hearing the actual story of Amalek waging war against the Jewish people. When in the world do we read about Amalek waging war against the Jewish people? Guess what? A few days later, Purim morning, not Megillas Esther, but there's laning in the Purim morning davening. So Purim morning, the Magen Avraham is of the opinion that a person could fulfill the mitzvah of Zachor by listening to the Torah reading Purim morning as well. So a person might have a situation for all kinds of reasons that it's not feasible for them to be at Parsha Zachor on Shabbos, but it is feasible for them to be at Purim morning in davening. And if they are able to do that, they should just have in mind during the Purim morning Torah reading that they're fulfilling the Parsha Zachor at this juncture. That would be option number one. Option number two, I did not include this in the guidance that I sent out, but a number of rabbis have included it. It's not perfect because it would be more than a year since the last time we did it, but option number two would be to wait until it's Parshas Kiseitze, if I'm not mistaken, in the summertime. At the end of Parshas Kiseitze, that's where the Psukim of Zachor are from. So theoretically, if a person could just try to make a mental note to be in Shul for Parshas Kiseitze in the summer, hopefully we'll be in better shape by then, hopefully. So a person could have in mind to fulfill Zachor then. There's two sort of downsides with that. One is, like I said, it's not within the year. The other is, I guess we'll try to remind people at the time, but it's hard. Like right now, we're focused on that. So if it's possible to do the per morning thing, I think that's better than waiting for Parshas Kiseitze. But let's say neither one of those options is an option, or a person's worried they're going to forget Parshas Kiseitze, or a person says, who knows what's going to be happening Parshas Kiseitze? All reasonable concerns. So then what could one do? So in the end of the day, we try our best. What can I tell you? All we can do is try our best. If a person did not have the opportunity to hear Zachor this Shabbos, I would recommend reading the Psukim from a Chumash. It's not the same thing as hearing it from the Torah, but it is something. It's not nothing. I would recommend doing that. Another option, we're going to touch on this soon. There's a question if a person could fulfill the mitzvah of Megillah by Zoom. There's a similar question if a person could fulfill the mitzvah of Zachor by Zoom. So it might not be a bad idea if a person missed Zachor and the other solutions that we mentioned weren't feasible for them. It might not be a bad idea to try to hear the Torah reading per morning on Zoom as well. Definitely, I would rank that lower than the other options. But at the end of the day, all we can do is try our best. That's the recommendation I would give for Parashat Zachor. But to reiterate, if a person is in a situation that it would cause danger to other people by their attending, they'd be doing an Aveira by going to Parashat Zachor. So that certainly a person shouldn't do. If a person's not feeling well that morning, person has COVID, whatever, they shouldn't be going to Parashat Zachor. Okay, next question, shifting to Megillah. This is a really, really Meshugana year in all kinds of ways, and probably the most challenging mitzvah for most of us this Purim will be Megillah reading. May a woman read Megillah to her family? Okay, so including her husband. So let's talk this through. So first of all, it's interesting. Women and men are, on a basic level, are all obligated in the mitzvah of Megillah. Even though Megillah is a positive time-bound mitzvah, the Gemara explains that because women, different ways to understand it, either played a prominent role in the miracle of Purim or benefited as much in the miracle of Purim as men did, women are obligated in the mitzvah of Megillah. So that's statement number one. So a woman is obligated. A woman doesn't have to figure out a way to do Megillah or hear Megillah just like a man does. Statement number one. So a woman could certainly read Megillah for herself without question. A woman could certainly read Megillah for other women without question. The Shulchan Aruch brings down an opinion that because at the time that the Megillah reading was started, it wouldn't have been a normal thing for a woman to read Megillah for others. He says that the nature of the woman's mitzvah of Megillah is actually slightly different than the nature of the man's mitzvah of Megillah, whereas a man's mitzvah, the Shulchan Aruch says, would be based on reading it. A woman's mitzvah would be based on hearing it. And so the Shulchan Aruch says, he brings down an opinion, which we normally are machmer like this opinion, that a woman should not read Megillah for a man. I'm not talking right now about quote unquote, culturally, traditionally, some people do this, some people do that. I'm talking about very technical halacha. If a family found themselves in a situation that there was no way for the man or the men of the household to be Yotze Megillah other than hearing it read by a woman in the household, I would certainly say that's better than not doing so. But if at all possible, it would be correct. It would be fine for a woman to read for herself, fine for a woman to read for other women. It would be discouraged in halacha for a woman to read for a man. I'll also note that the Ramah says that if a woman reads for herself, the language of the bracha would not be likro Megillah, to read the Megillah, rather it would be lishmoa Megillah, to hear the Megillah. Okay. Next question. Great question. So normally, and it's true this year as well, Tanis Esther is on Thursday. So Thursday is a fast day, and then Purim begins Thursday night, right? So normally the practice is we don't break our fast until after we hear Megillah reading. So every year there are people who go to a late Megillah reading, but obviously the shaila is much more pressing for so many of us this year because there's a limited numbers of people at any given Megillah reading, so there have to be shifts, many shifts. And many of us who have never been to a late Megillah reading before will need to attend a late Megillah reading this year. So the question is, does someone have to fast until after they hear the Megillah in such a circumstance? If a person goes to a Megillah reading that's right at the beginning of Purim, so yeah, so you listen to Megillah, you come home, you break the fast. That's what we normally do. But if a person is not in that situation, if they're going to a Megillah reading at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, whatever, do they have to fast through that? So the way it's brought down to halacha is a little bit vague, to be candid with you. The way it's brought down to halacha is if a person finds it difficult to fast that long, they can break their fast on a little bit. Isn't a little bit a great term? They could break, I'd say a little bit is like 3/4 of the Hamantasha behind Howard right now, something like that. But the basic idea would be, it seems in halacha, the basic idea would be, let's say, to take a drink and to have, if you think of like a slice of rye bread, like less food than a slice of rye bread. That's not a lot, to be honest with you. But if a person felt that they could do okay sort of holding out until 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock Megillah reading, but they just need something to put in their system. They want to have a drink. They just want to have a bite. They could do that. And that would be like really normal and really fine. Statement number one. Statement number two, if a person is already getting more stressed out by hearing what I just said, and they say, there's no way in the world I could hold out that long. Or if a person is willing to try, but come, 7:30 Thursday night, they say, this is crazy. I do think one could be lenient and really break their fast in a more substantive way and really, really eat. The one piece of practical advice I would give is to set an alarm for oneself, to remind oneself to still go to Megillah. In other words, one of the reasons why we don't eat before we read Megillah is, in general, when there are timely mitzvos, there's a concern that if I start a meal, I'll kind of get carried away with the meal. So therefore, if I set a phone alarm for myself or something, or if there's someone in the household who is going to an early reading, and I tell them, do me a favor, when you come home, your job is to remind me, when it's time for me to go to Megillah reading or something like that. Probably the best thing would be a phone alarm, because that person's going to be eating a meal then. The point is something external, that someone who's not someone or something that's not bound by the same confusions that I'm bound by. So it would be okay. So again, the ideal thing would be to just have a little bit to eat when the fast, eat or drink when the fast ends, and then eat more substantially when one gets home from the late Megillah reading. But if that's difficult for a person, I think it would be fine to eat a normal meal. But just before beginning the meal, one should set a phone alarm for themselves or leave a note for themselves in a place that they'll see it before it's time for Megillah reading, like 8:45, go to shul, so something like that. So that's the recommendation I would give for that issue. Okay, really, really good question. And it's obviously uniquely relevant this year. Could a person be Yotzei Megillah reading by microphone? In other words, imagine the following situation. It's very fair to ask this. Person's going to go to an outside Megillah reading, or a person's going to read at an outside Megillah reading. And, the county rules right now, if I'm not mistaken, are no more than 25 people. But you're going to have those 25 people spread out, of course, as is very important. By the way, presumably the person reading the Megillah is wearing a mask, hopefully. So, obviously a microphone would probably help. The general approach in halacha is to be extremely discouraging of the microphone. The reason why is because there's great question in halacha. Are you really hearing the person anymore, or are you hearing artificial magnifying of the person's voice? So the general approach in halacha, and I'm not aware of mainstream authorities being lenient about that this year. That's my knowledge, at least. The general approach is not to do microphones for Megillah reading and the like, though it's a very fair question. Okay. The question is, how's a Balkori supposed to, if it's an outside reading, how's a Balkori supposed to make sure that they'll be heard? I wish I had some brilliant halachic solution. I don't. One practical thing, which I'm sure is not my novel thought, but we're used to in shul a person who does something kind of standing in front and everyone's standing behind. The rabbi even sits in front. We're used to that in shul. Probably in such a setting, it would probably make the most sense to position the person reading the Megillah in the middle of the group. Obviously, everyone distanced, but in the middle of the group. What I do want to talk about for a moment is a question that one could ask every year, but it's all the more relevant this year. What am I supposed to do if I can't hear everything in Megillah? What am I supposed to do? Again, doesn't have to be a COVID question, but it's certainly relevant in COVID. Person sitting and, there was a car that drove by, they didn't hear it well. So they're basically hearing, if you're not basically hearing the Megillah, you're really not being Yotzei if you can't hear the person. Excuse me. Person is sitting and they can hear the Baal Koreh and they missed a word, they missed a pasuk. So for that, the halacha is as follows. The halacha is that it's very worthwhile to be sitting with your own printed version of the Megillah. Okay? It's very worthwhile to be sitting with your own printed version of the Megillah. And if there's anything that you don't hear, fill in what you don't hear from the printed book in front of you. I'm not talking about a kosher Megillah right now. I'm talking about even if you just have a printed pamphlet or whatever, fill it in. And as long as you quickly catch up to the Baal Koreh, you're okay. Now, you can't do that for the very beginning of the Megillah. The very beginning of the Megillah, you have to hear from Baal Koreh with the klaf. You can't do that for the very end of the Megillah. You can't do that for the majority of the Megillah. But if it's a word here, a word there, a pasuk here, a pasuk there, you can fill it in and just fill it in quickly to try to get up to where the Baal Koreh is at. Okay, so the question is, what's the story if it's difficult to get to a Megillah reading? There could be all kinds of reasons it's difficult to get to a Megillah reading. It could be there's precipitation on the day. People remember we had a Purim, I don't know, a few years ago, even though everything now feels like decades ago, I think. But we had a Purim a few years ago where it snowed, and it ended up not being as bad as people were concerned, but people really were worried would be able to make it to Megillah reading Purim day and things like that. So you could have that situation. You could have a situation, heaven forbid, a person wakes up Purim morning and either they have COVID or they have symptoms that they shouldn't go. They don't know how to read the Megillah. They don't have a Megillah. What are they supposed to do? So there's a big question if a person can be Yotzei by Zoom. There's a big question about that. We already said a microphone is a question. So a Zoom is all the more so a question. It would not be true to say that no one says you could be Yotzei by Zoom. It would not be true to say that. It would not be true to say that everyone says it could be Yotzei by Zoom. The general mainstream approach is that if at all possible, if it's possible to avoid using Zoom, and if a person is able to fulfill the mitzvah of the Megillah in person, that is far, far preferable. But if for whatever reason it is, or a person just doesn't feel it's safe for them to be, not because of their own illness, thank God, but because they're concerned about catching it from someone else. The person really doesn't feel that's an option and there's no other recourse, then I would say that Zoom makes sense. Zoom, I would really say is sort of a last resort, but as far as last resorts go, it's probably a pretty good last resort. If a person had to decide between reading the Megillah from a printed book or listening by Zoom to someone reading it from a Megillah, they should definitely do Zoom. Definitely do Zoom in that case. I am hoping that we will organize. It is my plan. Honestly, I've just sort of been focused on other things, but it is my plan that we will have some kind of Zoom options for people on Purim. Stay tuned for that. But I have to reiterate and make very, very clear, in my halachic opinion, Zoom would really be a last option. I just want to be clear about that. What would be a far better option than Zoom, and perhaps for some people this is practical, my guess is for many people it's not practical, but for some people perhaps, will be a far better option than Zoom is if you either own a Megillah or you know someone who owns a Megillah and maybe they lend you their Megillah after they used it themselves, something like that. I would recommend the following. A number of people have asked me about this. I would recommend pulling out your Megillah, and you could do it one of two ways. You could just read the words of the Megillah. If there's another member of the family there, they can spot you, to correct you when when you're not doing it correctly, whatever it is. That would be one option. So they're not going to ask you to be the Baal Koreh in Shul next Purim. It's okay. People have asked me, is it okay if you do it without the truck, just to read the words? Again, reading it from a kosher Megillah, an actual klaf, an actual scroll. Absolutely, you're Yotzei with that. That's one option. The related option that I think is worthy of consideration, if you either have a Megillah or can get your hands on one, is to not do Zoom, because with Zoom there's always a risk that you'll get broken off, or anyway, who knows if you'll be able to hear the person as well as you'd like, but go online and get a recording of someone doing Megillah Esther and pull out your own Megillah scroll and read along with the person. You know, for those men on the Zoom, like you do when you get an Aliyah, right? You're standing there next to the Balkori. The Balkori is the one who knows what to do, but you're reading along with him. He's leading you along. Now, I want to be very clear. If you do that, you should say the words out loud. You should, you're not being yotze with the recording that you're listening to. You're being yotze with your reading from the Megillah scroll. Okay? But that, I think, is a very valuable option if a person can get their hands on a Megillah. That's far better than doing it by Zoom. And maybe for some people it's helpful. 2 sites, you know, if you don't mind indulging me for 1 second, I apologize for the delay. What I'd like to do is I'd like to just cut and paste for you 2 sites that I found that have 2 sites that I found that have this recording. Again, please forgive the delay. While you're waiting, I'll just share with you. I'm sorry, I should have had this ready. Poor planning on my part. Hold on. Oh, gosh, hold on 1 second. I'm so sorry. I'll just, while you're patiently waiting, I'll just share with you that, as some of you know, we were, Atara and I were very much blessed with our dear son Yosef on a Purim. And Yosef was born Purim afternoon. So, and we went to Shul. We went to Shul before it was time for Megillah reading. So that was an interesting experience. So we had to figure out how to fulfill all the mitzvahs of Purim. We had to figure out how to fulfill all the mitzvahs of Purim in the hospital. So I, of course, did not have a Megillah, nor, by the way, had I ever read Megillah before in my life. So that was challenging. But Yaakov Lippman, wonderful Baal Chesed, was kind enough to bring us a Megillah. The Broths actually lent him our Megillah. Lent him a Megillah. I can't find it. I'll find the Plenetta at the end. I apologize. In any event, there I was. I never read Megillah before. I was fumfering my way through Megillah Esther. And in between contractions, my wonderful wife was telling me what I got right and what I got wrong. It was a quieter time at the moment, but we did it. Thank God we did it. Just in case I don't find it later, one person found a good recording on Chabad.org, okay? And I found a recording on YU Torah. So I would, again, I personally didn't listen to either recording, but both are there, specifically geared towards teaching people how to read Megillah Esther. So that's what I would recommend. I'm sorry I didn't have it yet in mind. It got away from me. I apologize. Okay, there's an interesting question. Is there a preference between daytime Megillah reading or nighttime Megillah reading? Let me be very clear. The mitzvah of Megillah is to do it both during the day and, oh, thank you so much. The person who just chatted me a site, could you chat it to everyone, please? One person was kind enough to share a site that they found. Thank you for that. So if you look in the chat box, somebody should be putting it in, I hope. Okay, so the mitzvah of Megillah is both. The mitzvah of Megillah is both nighttime and daytime. Let's say, I don't know, let's say it is better to do it with a minyan. You don't have to do it with a minyan. You would say without a minyan, but it's nicer to do it with a minyan. Let's say a person, for whatever reason, was going to go to Megillah once. I don't know, let's say they're going to do Zoom once and, you know, and do Megillah in person once, even though we know that's not what they're really, that's not the ideal. It does seem the primary mitzvah of Megillah is the daytime versus the nighttime. But I emphasize that really the mitzvah of Megillah is both. I just want to be clear about that. Okay, moving on from Megillah. Okay, so this I suppose is more of a science, of a medical question, a health question, than a halacha question. Should all shalach manos be prepackaged and bought this year? So I'll only tell you that obviously people have to make their own medical decisions, and people should consult with who they want to consult with. I asked the doctor if he thought there was a unique benefit in only giving, prepackaged, bought things in shalach manos as opposed to homemade. And this doctor didn't see a difference. See, the thing with the simchas that people are like, if people do something, they like give you this prepackaged thing, is because there's great concern about if there's a platter out, I'm gonna come and I'm touching this, I'm breathing on that, and then 2 minutes later you're gonna be there. So it's likely you're exposed. And then imagine chas v'sholom, there's one person who doesn't know it, they have COVID, and 45 people are handling the same thing this person has been handling over a span of 15 minutes. It doesn't sound good, right? So therefore, if you give people packages of things, then they're not dealing with what other is dealing with. That's what I was told. I don't know how much of a rabbi I am, but I know I'm not a doctor. So people should feel free to ask their own medical advisors that question. But that's at least what the advice that I received. To be absolutely clear, what is vital is that if people are to participate in shalach manos, I'm going to talk about what the minimums are in a moment, but to whatever extent people participate in shalach manos, it is vital that people practice social distancing. I want to talk, thank you for the person who sent in that Chabad one. There's another one in the chat now. Thank you for finding Megillah reading. It's vital that people practice social distancing. There's no obligation to hand the shalach manos to the other person by hand. In other words, it doesn't have to go from your hand to their hand. It's fine for you to knock on the door, put it down by the door, stand back 6 feet, wait for them to open the door, and they see who you are, and you say to them, my shalach manos is right over there, and wish each other a happy Purim, and that's great. But social distancing and masks, that's really, really important. I'd be much more focused on that than on the packaging. Obviously, if a person is delivering shalach manos, and certainly if a person is making food for shalach manos, before they handle the things, whether it be in the kitchen, whether it be in the car, they should make sure their hands are clean. I mean, that's appropriate. I'm sure we could all by this point recognize the value of that. Okay. What's the minimum of shalach manos? This could be discussed any year, but again, I think this year we're more focused on it. The minimum of shalach manos is I have a mitzvah to give 2 ready-to-eat appropriate portions of food to 1 person. Okay, so just to give a few examples, just to make sure we're all on the same page. If I wanted to give a box of raisins and a generous-sized hamantash to a person, I'm yotzei shalach manos with that. Okay, I'm assuming that we would consider 1 hamantash to be, an appropriate portion for someone. If I give 1 raisin and 1 pretzel to someone, I don't think I'm yotzei shalach manos with that. That's not a portion. We also normally say that the food should be ready to eat. So a microwave container of popcorn, it's fine to include a microwave container of popcorn in my shalach manos, but if that's what I'm counting out to be one of the 2 foods, that's not such a good idea. It could be a food and a drink, by the way. Okay, it doesn't have to be foods, it could be a food and a drink. There's a common misconception. People think they have to be 2 separate brachas. They don't have to be 2 separate brachas. They should just be 2 different types of foods. So I could give an apple and an orange to someone and be yotzei shalach manos. I could give a piece of chocolate cake and a hamantash to someone and be yotzei shalach manos. And the same doctor you ask about COVID would surely prefer that you give an apple and an orange to the chocolate cake and hamantash, but that's between you and your doctor. Now, we normally say that it's appropriate for all bar or bas mitzvah members of the household to give or be the donor of at least 1 shalach manos. So if we're doing it, so that Purim in the hospital, someone was kind enough to bring me something. And so I said, wait a second, it was someone actually, the Purim day, a person brought me a Megillah. I said, wait a second, let me give you a Shalach Manas before you go. So then I was Yotzei Shalach Manas. And there was actually another woman in the community that had given birth the night before. So she was in the same section we were in after the baby was born. So Atara appointed me as her shliach, and I brought that person 2 things, left it at the door for Shalach Manas. So even doing it minimal this year would be appropriate for each member of the household to have 1 Shalach Manas given on their behalf. And if it's a family of a parent and children, really each bar or bat mitzvah member of the household should have 1 Shalach Manas given on their behalf. Now, I want to be clear about this. I'm definitely in fulfillment of Shalach Manas if someone gives it for me. So just to be clear, maybe I'm not comfortable. Maybe I'm not comfortable going around to deliver Shalach Manas to people this year. But someone came to my door to deliver Shalach Manas anyway. Or someone asked me, would you like me to deliver Shalach Manas for you? I said, that would be great. So what I do is I take 1 basket. I don't want to get in the car. I don't want to knock on doors. I don't want any of it. I take 1 basket. I leave it outside my door. And my friend, my neighbor, whatever it is, will go. And I tell them, bring it to the Cohen family, on Kersey. I don't know if there's a Cohen on Kersey. I'm not remembering. There is a Cohen on Kersey. But bring it to the Cohen family on Kersey. So my neighbor can take it, bring it to the Cohen family on Kersey, and say, hi, it's from the Rosenbaums. And I'm Yotzei Shalach Manas with that also. But it should be something that I provided. I don't have to be the schlepper. I can appoint someone else to be the schlepper, but it should be something that I provided. Okay. Machzas HaShekel. Machzas HaShekel, for those not familiar, it's the minhag in Klal Yisrael. It's to commemorate the giving of the half shekel in the times of the temple, the times of the Beis HaMikdash. Many of you either do it or have seen it. Those $50 plates are out in Shul, Tanis Esther afternoon and Purim day. And the practice is for some people do it for every adult over the age of 20. Some people do it for every adult. Some people do it for everybody over bar bat mitzvah. Some people do it for every member of the household. Different practices about this. But the bottom line is you give. So in our family, we normally do it for all the members of the household. So Kanai Nahara, you have Baruch Hashem, we have Kanai Nahara, we have 7 people to give Machzas HaShekel for, B'li Nahara, and so it's $1.50 per person. So what I do is I write out a check for 7 times 150 is $10.50. I write out a check and I write it to whatever, to the charity fund, whatever it is. I place the check for $10.50 on the plate, and I pick up the $3.50. You could pick it up for each one of the household, whatever it is. In any event, the question asked is, how does one do that this year? So here's our plan in the shul. There is, of course, reason to be concerned about COVID. I myself said something before about COVID with the foods and things like that. Our plan in the shul is to offer this. We plan on having a thing of hand sanitizer out by the coins so that people can do it the way they normally do it. They would be advised to sanitize before and after they pick up the coins. Obviously, people going up to the plate should social distance one from the other. We do plan on affording that option in shul. Having said that, if a person either is not going to be in shul, very understandable, or this makes them nervous, it's very understandable that it would make them nervous. I have seen opinions that it's not essential for a person to actually do the thing with the coins. So if a person wanted, they could donate $1.50 per person they normally give Machzas HaShekel for, and just send it as a check for charity. And have in mind, this is for Machzas HaShekel. They, would be appropriate to either at least write the check, ideally to mail it out. Let's say Tanis Esther or Purim. Unlike Matanos Levyonim, it's not essential that it reach its recipient by Purim day. It's not like Matanos Levyonim. So that's another thing to keep in mind. And then the last question here, and then after this, we'll open it up to the floor. This is a general question. This is not a COVID question. What amount should a family give for Matanos Levyonim? So the mitzvah Matanos Levyonim is gifts to the poor. The mitzvah Matanos Levyonim is to give, practically the way it's normally understood, is give the minimal amount needed for a meal to two different needy people. Okay. Now, the vast majority of us don't actually give money to needy people on Purim because it's hard to know who's needy. And even if you knew who was needy, it's exceedingly awkward and possibly even embarrassing to the recipient that you walk up to them, hi, I bet you need money. You're going to be in my mitzvah. It's not appropriate, of course. So what the vast majority of us do is we give to collections. We shouldn't just give it to charity on Purim. It should be specifically to a charity that is advertising that they will distribute the money Matanos Levyonim. In the show, we do that. Someone put in Yad Yehuda. Yad Yehuda does that. Franco Foundation does that. All these things, again, when you're donating, you should make it clear that you're donating for Matanos Levyonim to any of these organizations. They need to, they either need to receive the money by Purim, or at the very least, they need to know the money is coming by Purim. You should be setting it aside. There are numerous organizations in Israel that do this, but the key is they should at least know the money is coming by Purim day, so that they're giving money. So like if people send in for Matanos Levyonim in the shul, I'm distributing money to needy people on Purim day. And I base it on the numbers that I'm given. This year, it's such a short day anyway. The deadline, absolute deadline, is Purim night, Thursday night. But I sit down and I figure out how much money I have to give out. I give out all the money on Purim day to needy people in the community. And occasionally I give a little bit to needy causes in Israel as well. But most of the time, I really just use it for the community. So how much is that? So I would posit to you that with $2.50, you could make a humble meal for yourself at Shalom's. I would posit to you, you might have to be creative. Posit to you, you could buy a bagel for 75 cents. You could go to the deli counter in the back and ask for a few pieces of a turkey roll, whatever, and make a sandwich for yourself. They'll tell you the turkey roll sandwich is $6.50 or whatever they tell you. That's fine. That's if you want there with all the trimmings. I just want, a bagel and some deli. So I would argue that if I give $5 of Matanos Levyonim, I have fulfilled the mitzvah. The Rambam famously says that if there's one mitzvah that we're going to spend more for on Purim, it should be Matanos Levyonim. $5 is certainly not a limit. We can give much more than $5, but as a minimum obligation should be $5. That's what I would recommend. It's per bar or bat mitzvah member of the household. So if it's a household of three, three Jewish adults over bar or bat mitzvah, I would recommend giving at least $15 to Matanos Levyonim. I'll also mention there are many wonderful places that one could give Matanos Levyonim to. If you'll be in shul Purim night, not at the outside minyan, at the inside minyan, Purim night, we'll have opportunities there to drop off Matanos Levyonim. I emphasize Purim night at the inside minyanim. Yale and Sarah Ginsburg are kind enough to use their home. They have a mail slot, so it's not like a mailbox. So they volunteered that anyone who would like to drop off Matanos Levyonim, you could already do it now if you want. The deadline is Thursday night of Purim. Anyone who wants to drop off Matanos Levyonim should just write on the envelope Purim. If you wanted to make a check out to YSC Charity Fund or cash, either way, you could drop it at the home of Yale and Sarah Ginsburg on Fulham, not to be confused with the home of Faith Ginsburg. It's another Ginsburg on Fulham, but I don't remember if it's Fulham or not, but Yale and Sarah are on Fulham. Thank you. Yale just put in the address. Yale, I was about to go into all my jokes about the board of directors, but I guess I shouldn't now that I know you're on. That was a joke. Please do not send in by PayPal to the shul for Matanos Levyonim. Please do not send in by PayPal to Matanos Levyonim. My understanding is you could do PayPal with both Yad Yud and Franco Foundation. I would recommend against mailing Matanos Levyonim because I don't know about any of you, but I'm finding the mail service right now is extremely unpredictable. I'm sure it's challenging for them, but I would recommend against using mail. So if you're going to be inside in Shul Purim night, you could drop Matanos Levyonim then. You could also drop it off at the Ginsburgs anytime from now until Thursday night of Purim. And if you want to donate online, there are many wonderful causes. Please do not donate to the shul. I mean, always donate to the shul online, but please do not donate to the shul's Matanos Levyonim fund. Okay, so that exhausts the questions that were sent in to the best of my knowledge. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the questions that were chatted. You see in the chat a number of emails have been mentioned. One of them, for those listening on the recording, is Chabad.org. There's abalkore.com. Okay, the question that has been asked, is there any beautification of a mitzvah to give shalach manos to more than one person? Shalach manos is a lovely mitzvah. It's nice to give however many people you want to give to, but the mitzvah is to give it to one person. I don't believe there's any special heter in giving 2 versus 3 or 4 or whatever. Okay, the question has been posed. Many of you probably have heard about this. Is there an issue that a woman is not supposed to give shalach manos to a man? Is that for real? So the truth is, it's a Ramah. The Ramah specifically talks about a man not giving shalach manos to a woman. It might sound a little bit strange. The concern is as follows. You know, if a man were to give a woman a monetary gift or a gift worth money and say to her afterwards, I'd like to marry you with this gift, and she accepts it and there are witnesses, she very well might halachically be married. I'm sure many of you have heard stories like that from wise Alex. Were learning the tractate of Kiddushin and wanted to show off to their friends. So the Ramah, I probably part of it is because Purim is a little bit of a more kind of joking kind of day. Anyway, the Ramah advises against people giving from one gender to the other. Having said that, if you're giving to a couple or giving to a family, or even giving, by the way, to a group of women or a group of men, I think all those things would be fine to give to the opposite gender. It's just when it's specifically, you know, woman A is giving to man B and no broader groups, that I think is where it is. The Ramah advises against it. Thank you for raising that. The question has been asked about the Purim Suda. What's supposed to be the timing of the Purim Suda this year? This, of course, is not a COVID question. This is a Friday Purim question. Remember when you thought the most complicating thing about Friday Purim was when to eat the Purim Suda? Now, you know, now it's been 45 minutes and now we're only getting to it. So, statement number one is that there's a mitzvah of having a festive meal Friday night in honor of Shabbos. And a person should not eat so much at the Purim Suda that they lose their appetite for Friday night. Statement number one. Statement number two, the halachic definition of a Purim Suda is a person should eat bread as long as it's not damaging to one's health to eat bread. A person should wash and make hamotzi, and a person should have something that they see as festive. That's a very relative term. You know, some people have a much simpler Purim Suda this year because it's so hard to find the time, and it's also they want to have an appetite for Friday night also. You could be yotze per the Purim Suda with that bagel and turkey roll that I mentioned from Shalom's. You could be yotze with that. Obviously, the spirit of the Purim Suda, if it's feasible for a person, is something that a person finds special. But that's sort of the baseline, and it should be that a person doesn't eat too much that they lose their appetite. Now, what about the timing? So the classic recommendation is that a person is supposed to begin their Purim Suda before halachic midday. If you look at that Purim guidance cyber brief that I sent out about a week ago, I actually listed a specific time in there. I think the time was like 12:22, something like that. I think so, but you can double check me or you can look it up. It's chatzos. That's ideal. It's ideal to wash before halachic midday, this Purim. If it didn't work out for a person, or it could very well be that a person would love to do that, but they're at a Megillah reading because that's when they got into a Megillah reading. That really might happen to people this year. It's okay to do it later as well. The absolute deadline for when a person washes is 9 halachic hours into the day. I didn't refer to it as, I don't think I referred to it as that in the cyber brief, but I did give a later time. It's something like 3:35 in the afternoon. That's really, 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 a person should be washing by then. If it, you know, really, that's really, really the deadline. Now, by the way, a person can eat the Purim Suda very early in the day. It should just be daytime. A person should have davened Shachris before eating the Purim Suda. But a person can eat the Purim Suda. A person can have a nice breakfast 9:30 in the morning. That's okay too. So it should be whenever you eat. It should be that you still have an appetite for Friday night. Ideally, a person should be washing before halachik midday. The latest time is 9 hours into the day. That's like 3:35, something like that. Thank you for raising that. It's an important question. Okay, I don't believe there's any more questions in the chat unless I missed any. Would anybody like to? Thank you, Menashe. Menashe just gave the times. The first time is the ideal time to wash by. Second time is the latest time. Thanks very much. Would anyone like to just call out a question or put it in the chat?
Yes, Rabbi. This is Jerry Katzoff here.
Yes.
And Rabbi, so I'm in a community down in Florida in which the typical age is considerably older than in your shul. So we're all retirees, and many of us have not been vaccinated.
Okay.
So that's by way of context, by way of background. You had mentioned the possibility of Zoom for Megillah, and that you felt was the lowest madrega.
But if that's what works, then it should be done. But it's right.
Right.
It's the last resort. That's what I would say.
Turn down in our community is that Zoom every so often breaks up.
Mm.
So we are prepared to have a phone hookup where people can listen by phone. Where does that fit into your?
Thank you so much, Jerry. Thank you for raising that. It's wonderful to see you. And the greatest sign that I think you're a great guy is I didn't throw you off the Zoom when you had the chutzpah to say you're in Florida and you're not experiencing the weather that we're experiencing. I would equate phone to Zoom, and it's a very important thing. I don't think phone is any worse than Zoom, and people might very well find that it's more practical than Zoom. By the way, well, yeah, thank you for raising that, Jerry. That would be my opinion at least. Shmuel, it looks like your chat question was answered by someone else. Am I correct?
Yeah, I think so. So it's best to have it before chatzot.
It would be best. It would be best, but if one wasn't able to eat the Purim suda before chatzos, as long as they wash, the latest to wash would be 3:37. It should be before 3:37. Still okay.
Rabbi, regarding the Seuda, does one have to have fleischiks or is dairy okay? Or
very interesting question. There are some who say that it specifically has to be fleischiks. I don't think it's essential that it be fleischiks. It should be something, again, minimalistic. A person certainly would say if they wash, have a motzi and bench. But trying to do, sort of more in the spirit of the day, I would say, it should be something that is special for the people, you know what I mean, and whatever that is. For some of us, a nice mochik's meal could be very exciting for some of us, So I think it's very objective. I'm sorry, subjective. Sorry, but if a nice meal for people would be mochik's, I think that's fine.
Question for Rabbi. Ron Scheinson's question asked if you could do this by credit card as opposed by check. Is that
okay? So if Ron, I'm so sorry if I thought I had answered, but if I misread your question, I apologize. Thank you, Yaakov. I believe it's fine to fulfill the mitzvah by credit card for Matanos Lavyonim as long as one submits it no later than Purim itself. But please don't do it with credit card with the shul. That's what I thought your question. I've been around before I mentioned it. But if I misread your question, I apologize. But yes, I would say credit card is okay as well. Thank you for raising that, Yaakov.
Thank you.
Yeah, someone wrote in a very valid question. Maybe people can ask me that separately, privately. It's, I think, more of a personal nature question. Anything else? Last call. Okay. Thank you everyone for joining us. As always, the fact that people sent in the questions was extremely helpful. Now let's just talk for a second. And thank you everyone for your questions during it and for smiling at my jokes. I also thank you. It keeps me going. Now let's just talk about, I think Pesach, yes, thank you so much, Miriam. I think it would be worthwhile to have one of these for Pesach. So I actually have 2 quickies. So one question is, I'm sure many of you know we normally have a pre-Pesach class, kind of I go through things with products and things like that. I have found that this format is, I think, very helpful, particularly for people with unique questions for a unique year. I definitely want to have one of these before Pesach. Okay, I definitely want to have one of these before Pesach. Here's my question. I'm just curious what people here feel. If you could answer with a shake of your head, either nod or shake. Do you think we should also have the regular pre-Pesach class? Or do you think if we're having this, we don't need the pre-Pesach class? Nod or shake your head. The question is, yes, regular pre-Pesach class, or no need for regular pre-Pesach class? What do people think? Okay, so the general consensus that I'm getting is, let's do this instead of the pre-Pesach class. I see a chat from someone to the contrary. Here's the thing, we won't make the final decision here, but we'll definitely schedule one of these. Now, million-dollar question. When should this class happen? Now, before you answer, I want to remind everybody, besides whatever stuff people are going to have to figure out with Pesach and everything, besides all of that, not unfortunately, but there's a unique challenge this year with COVID, which is that Shabbos is Erev Pesach, which brings its own set of questions. And maybe it'll be a little bit different because it's COVID, but so maybe keep that in mind. I guess the basic question is, let me look at my calendar for a second. Yeah, so Miriam, I think you're right. The basic question is, should we be doing it? I actually can't do it March 16th. Do we think we should be doing it March, well, let me say this. We could be doing it March 15th. That's the 2nd of Nisan. That's about a week and a half before Yom Tov. I think probably Monday night, March 15th is probably a good time to do it. Does that, or do people think we should do it the week before where it's not even Nisan yet? Like a solid 2 weeks before, over 2 weeks before Pesach.
I think you should do it earlier.
So Sue's voting for March 9th. What do people think? Tuesday, March 9th. It's
The 15th. I
Tuesday,
think.
March 9th.
I think the 15th is fine.
15th.
15th.
I agree, March 9th with Sue.
9.
It's March.
9th.
15th and make more trouble for the
Mrs.
rabbi.
Winter gives a class on Monday nights.
okay. So that's a good point. There's enough people anyway who want to do it March 9th, and unfortunately, I as a personal conflict, March 16th.
March 9th.
I just want to say, this whole thing is recorded. So if someone wants to know how it's confusing to be a rabbi, this March 9th, March 15th debate captures it. For anyone who wants to check this on the recording, we're going to say March 9th with all due respect to people March 15th. The fact that there's frequently a Monday night class will be the tiebreaker. So God willing, we'll do it 8 o'clock. Everybody should be well. Ask the rabbi Pesach questions March 9th.
March 9th with the replay on the 15th.
What?
March 9th and the replay on the 15th.
Thank you, Ron. As of now, I'm inclined to not do the regular pre-Pesach class. If people are interested in having the pre-Pesach class, please feel free to email me to that effect. In other words, if there's only a handful of people, with all due respect, I probably won't do the pre-Pesach class. But if there's significant feedback to have it, I'll be happy to do that as well.
Maybe you could combine the two.
Well, that's what I mean. I have a feeling, I'm not supposed to say this, but I think the pre-Pesach class is kind of on the dry side until people start asking their questions, to be honest with you. God willing, I'm sure I'll send out general advice about things by email, you know what I mean, and things like that. So I have a feeling that the real benefit of the primary benefit of the pre-Pesach class will come through this venue. That's sort of what I mean.
Yeah.
So that's my gut, but I'm curious to hear if people think otherwise. I'm going to get off now. I want to wish everyone a wonderful one. Barbara, Mrs. Price.
Wow, I'm so glad to hear Barbara.
would we have some of the papers in hand before March 9th? So that we
Here's
could-
the thing. I can try to. I think that's a really good idea. Thank you for raising that. And by the way, if you ever wonder why I call you Mrs. Price, it's because
know.
I'm always worried you're going to slug me. So now that we're on Zoom, I called you Barbara. That's the answer. But the bottom line is, I think that's a great suggestion. I will try to do that. Thank you for raising it. It's a really good
thank
idea. Yeah, thank you for that.
I'm gonna look.
Okay, anything else? Okay, thank you, everybody. A wonderful Purim. I know it's stressful, but with Hashem's help, we should still be able to capture the spirit of Simcha this Purim.
Amen.
Okay, nice to see everybody.
Thank you.
Take good
Thank
care.
Thank you.